I hope that you are well. I saw that this morning there were a lot of discussion in the forum of the e-learning platform around different contributions that have come. I see that our friends of Liberia are really enjoying some tips that are coming from other countries that are participating. And really thanks always, Deborah. I mean, thanks for your presence. This time it's not 3:30 in the morning, so it will probably be a bit later, which is good. I mean, we let you sleep a little bit at least on Mondays, so I think it's great. Maria and Florence, for you to know, Deborah is connecting from the Caribbean, so it's really early for her.
Impressively early.
Impressively early, but...
Appreciated, Deborah.
Very good, very good.
Okay, so this gives me the possibility to introduce you the two friends, colleagues, speakers that we have today with us. These are Maria Rosenstock from the European Training Foundation and Florus Prinsloo from many places in the world, but actually sitting in George, South Africa. I will just give you, Maria and Florus, 1 minute to introduce yourself, and then we will move on with our webinar. Maria, please.
Okay, good morning, very early morning for some of you, and good afternoon for colleagues in Asia. My name is Maria Rosenstock. I work for European Training Foundation. I've been working there for the last 2 years as a member of qualifications team. In our team, we support the EU partner countries surrounding Europe with reforms of qualification systems. And my particular focus has been validation. I also have some other functions like liaising for a little country in the Balkans, which is North Macedonia, but my main focus is validation. It's very nice to be here.
Thank you, Maria. And this course has been co-organized with the European Training Foundation. So we will have Maria in several, let's say, roles during this program, and also the member countries, I mean, the countries that are supported by ETF partner countries that will be present in different stages. Now, Florus is a coach and he is retired, but I have understood with Florus that these people, when they retire, they're actually more active than when they worked. So it's probably for you to introduce yourself, Florus.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and good morning, everybody. And it's really nice to see so many of the colleagues up, as Maria indicated, so early in the morning. As Stefano said, yes, I left formal employment in the end of March 2019 after close to about 18 years in national and provincial government, a lot of policy development. But immediately after I left formal employment, all sorts of other opportunities arose, and particularly with the International Labour Organization colleagues like Stefano and also the colleagues in Geneva. So I continue to work very, very kindly due to all these colleagues helping me. And I'm enjoying my work now because I have a real passion, particularly for apprenticeships. That is my real passion in life. But RPL has always been very closely linked to apprenticeships in South Africa. And so as I've worked particularly between 2010 and 2018 on the national apprenticeship system in South Africa, RPL was just part of the deal. You know? So I'm very glad to be here. Thank you, Stefano, for the opportunity. I'm originally from Kenya, but as Stefano says, I live in South Africa now. I'm right at the bottom of South Africa in a place called George, which is very close to the tip of Africa, Cape Bellis. So if I get on a boat on the sea here, which is only 2 kilometers away from my house, and I start rowing, the next stop is Antarctica. So yeah, and any colleagues here from East Africa, I'm Jambo. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that some of our colleagues from the Kenyan delegation should be here, so they will be greeted by your Jambo. So we are at the beginning of the week 2, module 2 of our work and of our course. So it's a module that is dedicated to the key barriers to recognition of prior learning, the key challenges that we have to find, and the building blocks of establishing a successful RPL system. So today with Maria and Florus, who work on the recognition of prior learning in different stages and at different levels, we are going to discuss a little bit through this conversation what are the main challenges of recognition of prior learning. What I wanted to highlight is that, of course, and as we did also in the forum in the first week, challenges are very different depending on the status, on the level of development of your RPL system. We have seen, for instance, with our colleagues from Liberia last week, some sets of challenges that are there. Others, for instance, looking and listening at the experience of the Philippines. So, of course, context, level of development of the country, level of development of your TVET system as a whole, of your qualification system as a whole, and level of development and history of your RPL system are all, let's say, dimensions that, in a sense, shape those particular challenges that you are living in. So through this week, as you have seen in the platform, let's say we will have several training activities, several learning activities for you. So we also made available for you the self-assessment tool that the European Training Foundation has prepared for the validation systems, how it is called in the European jargon. So this will help you look at yourself, look at your system, and see which are the gaps, which are the barriers. We will discuss that in a forum. And there is also a small surprise for Thursday in which we will try something new to discuss about the challenges of RPL. So there are several activities that you will be finding in the platform. Also an e-learning lesson that was developed by the ITC ILO, basing on the rich materials that the ILO have produced on let's say, the building blocks of a successful RPL system. So a very rich second week. But without further ado, I think I would like to listen first from Maria about the challenges that she and the European Training Foundation have encountered. Because as you said, you work on validation, you support countries in order to create and or further develop their RPL system. So your experience at ETF is particularly rich because you are supporting countries which are basically starting up their validation system, or others who have had their validation systems already in place and want to do this next step in order to improve and, in general, put these RPL systems to the service of their population. So we would really like to hear from you. I know you have prepared some slides to prepare from you, to listen from you some of the challenges that you have encountered. It could be interesting for us to move forward in our reflection in this second week of the course. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefano. I will try now to share my screen, and if you could kindly let me know if you can see it.
Yes. Yes.
Coming?
Yes,
Okay.
it's there.
Lovely.
Okay, great. So I will start maybe with a few words about European Training Foundation. We are an agency of the European Union based in Turin in Italy, but we have a mandate to work outside of European Union. I think we are the only agency that specifically deals with countries outside of Europe, countries bordering Europe to the east, to the south, North Africa, Middle East, and also with we work with some countries in Central Asia. ETF has been very focused on VET over 20 years. Now we are really expanding more into lifelong learning systems, human capacity development systems. And with regard to our work on validation, or RPL, we try to exchange knowledge of EU practices. So we basically share what is happening in Europe with partners outside of Europe. We engage in peer exercises, we monitor development, so we really try to follow what is happening every couple of years in our partner countries. We facilitate some training. A short information about the language. I think Stefano has warned you already. The way we call validation or RPL in Europe, it's called validation of non-formal and informal learning. Very long and complex. Also the abbreviation VNFIL. But when we talk about it, we mean RPL. I would like to mention a little bit about developments in Europe over the last years in this area. In 2012, there was a recommendation of European Council that encouraged all the member states to put in place validation arrangements. And since that time, also some funding from European funds has been triggered and projects to scale up these systems. And European member states did, in fact, really invest more in validation. Last year, there was also an evaluation of implementation of this recommendation that revealed that, okay, there are more opportunities for people, for individuals to have their skills validated, but still there are quite a lot of challenges, and the use of these systems is not up to the expectations, so to say. At the European level, we have a regional European qualifications framework, and this focus on validation is very strongly linked to the adoption of this principle and linked to EQF. There is the notion that new qualifications that are included in qualifications registers should offer option of award through validation. And there is this aspiration that validation should ultimately be treated as an equal route to qualification, equal to formal education. So our partner countries that ETF is working with, they look at European experiences, they learn from it, and they adapt, of course, to their own circumstances. What they have been working on in recent years with regards to validation was very initial steps. So drafting roadmaps, what has to be done for implementation, developing regulations, deciding on institutional setup, which bodies should be those institutional homes for validation. There were a lot of pilots of validation schemes that took place, quite often supported with technical assistance, EU-funded projects. There was a lot of training of validation personnel, especially assessors, validators, counselors. And all this usually, typically in our partner countries, took place also in the context of developing qualification frameworks. Not in every single case, there are countries which had RPL before, but usually the plans to introduce validations are very strongly linked to reforms of qualification systems. And yet, despite a couple of years of quite intensive work on validation, we noticed that most of the systems in our partner countries, again with some exceptions, most of the systems are not operational, and that they really face challenges which make it difficult to go beyond this pilot scale. As long as there are projects around that support validation, when there is this initial investment, something is happening, but then with scaling up, there are really very persistent challenges. And some of them I listed here. So I think very important challenge is that validation has to be built across different policies, education policies, labor market policies, economic development policies. It's quite often now mentioned in the context of migration policies as well. But for none of these policies, validation is a central point. So it's always at the edges, and we have to establish cooperation that really is trying to build quite a complex system on the edges of policy, and that really has that it's difficult. Yes, it's difficult. It's difficult also to when we think about funding, who should fund from those channels, what. This is a very tricky part. Then in our partner countries, which only recently have started reforming their qualification systems, we really don't have that many qualifications that are based on standards. And this switch to learning outcomes is it is moving. It's very visible that every few years when we do inventories of qualification frameworks or validation schemes, we see there's more and more in place, but it is expensive, of course, and it takes time. And in those reforms, assessment systems, which is at the central point of validation, these always come at the end. So assessment systems, even when we have occupational standards or qualification standards, there are quite often still not enough in those standards to guide the assessment practice. And when countries think about quality assurance, and the quality assurance of assessment really comes usually at the end. We of course need personnel, and here we had a very interesting example last year. One of our partner countries, Azerbaijan, piloted training just in 2 occupations. They did it very thoroughly. They decided to use the skills of teachers in vet schools, and it really took them a long time, half a year, to work with them on They prepared assessment items bank for these occupations, and they engaged teachers very intensively in this exercise. But it was a very interesting experience to see how much effort is needed to really prepare assessment and validation just for 2 occupations. And then the persistent problem is with attracting candidates. We know that people generally don't like to be assessed. I don't like sitting at the exams personally. I'm not sure if you do. And then if someone asks me, to pay for it additionally, I will really think a lot about what's in it for me before I decide to invest my time, maybe my resources, also my money into it. So this is even for advanced countries who have advanced systems and all the arrangements in place, this is really a problem that keeps coming back, that the intake of those services is not that high. And here we very smoothly come to the next stage, weak information and guidance. We always talk about it, and it's somehow mentioned in the policy documents, but when we look at the practice, it's somehow overlooked. Countries really focus on investing in personnel, in the occupational standards, in infrastructure to run the exams, and somehow this still gets lost. The really intensive guidance that candidates for validation really need to use the system. And then the also very persistent challenge, I think, for countries that are only starting with validation, but also for a lot of European countries where formal education systems are really very, very strong, that they do not really yet accommodate those flexible entry points. Even when there are arrangements to credit to award credits for competencies that are validated, quite often the training providers, they just don't have open enrollments throughout the year to provide bridging courses, top-up courses. So if people undergo validation and then they are told, okay, please come back in 10 months when we are opening our doors, that's just not very helpful or user-friendly, so to say. Funding, of course, is a challenge, and I think we are now working at times when at least at European level, there will be more funding, and there is a lot of talk about lifelong learning also in the context of post-COVID recovery. And somehow there are quite often a lot of projects that are willing to support, that can be triggered to provide investment into validation systems. But when we talk about regular funding, sustainable funding, really very few countries, even countries who have advanced systems, have it very well thought through, in a sense, or designed. So I think these are the quite generic challenges, and I have, a couple of reflections. The main one is really on this overarching policy in priority sectors. It's very, the approach in Europe, it's very generic. So we would like to see lifelong learning, we would like to see skills being visible, skills that are acquired outside the formal education systems. But it's not a concept that's very easy to to use for policymakers across those different policy areas in the labor market. And I just would like to give an example of an approach how we can talk about validation that I think might trigger much more attention when selected priority sectors are used to really trigger attention and focus and maybe to kickstart the system. For example, in the Balkans, in North Macedonia, one can see that partners really see it as a they would like to make the pool of skills visible for the economy, so that investors who want to come and invest in the country, they are convinced that these skills are there, because quite often they can't see it coming out from the statistics. Or, for example, there are sometimes sectors that have to reskill. Quite a lot around Europe, there is a lot of attention to improve the energy efficiency of buildings, for example. And we had a very nice project also in Macedonia, where almost 1,000 of construction workers have been, their skills have been assessed, validated. They also received additional training to really gear the sector to those requirements related to the environment. So I think finding these kind of priority sectors might really help in kickstarting the systems. And you probably already talked a lot and heard a lot about working across the sectors, how important it is to have everybody on board, to have employers really understanding what are these certificates, because they will not always be exactly the same as certificates from schools. Most of the time they will be different, and it's really crucial that employers are on board and that they also encourage people to use those services. Then there are a lot of it's very important to decide who should provide oversight. Quite a few countries decide to really open a market of providers, but it's good that there is a unit in the ministry or an agency for whom validation is really the opportunity for development, the main focal point, that they will, you know, work on it, work on collaboration, they will work on funding. This is important. Providers will need support regularly, and we see it that as soon as the state support, budget support walks away, or attention walks away, that the system goes down, and this will really be needed for a very long time to support the providers. It's also about decision who should do it. Some countries decide to do it with the existing vet schools. This might have pros and cons. There are also options to open the market and let new institutions apply for accreditation to be the providers. Maybe they will see opportunity for growth in validation for themselves, but all of them will need support. And then last point, and the point that I think I will always be coming to, is this experience of beneficiaries. In the private sector, we really have now the whole branch of business which deals with user experience, design thinking, and I think in validation there is this tendency to really forget about the experience of the user. Which are the groups that can benefit the most? Is the process lean for them? Are they guided through this process? Are they supported enough? How can we motivate them? And there are some interesting examples from EU member states where employers are engaged to motivate people, to send them for validation. There are interesting examples also that show that, for example, it might be helpful for the participants when there is a group validation. Yes, when not only I have to undergo this strange, lonely process, but that also my colleagues or colleagues from my sector will participate, and that encourages people to use it, because they will really need encouragement. Costs and benefits. So I mentioned it already. In many countries, participants have to pay for validation or share some of the costs, but there are groups of people which will always need support. And it varies country by country. We have an example of Portugal, where participants don't have to pay. It's a country which really wanted to upgrade the overall level of education of its population. It was very much below European average. And to do it, they are using European social funds to pay for the candidates so that they don't have to bear those costs. But quite often, people have to pay, and quite often in many countries, these are not very cheap services. Yeah, validation, which of course, again, influences the intake. And then last point, which I think is important both for countries that are just starting, but we see it really being an issue for countries with advanced systems, it's the monitoring. We really don't have data. We don't have enough data on the use of validation and on what is the benefit for people, who benefits, how people benefit. It's quite often difficult when validation is being provided by providers from different sectors in the labor market, in the education. Then it's a very difficult topic. And when we look at validation, information about validation from EU member states, there are still huge gaps with this regard. At the end, I just would like to draw your attention to some resources. If you would be interested in experiences from EU member states, our sister agency, CEDEFOP, which deals with vocational education inside Europe, is running this periodic review of validation arrangements in every EU member state and also in some countries around Europe. ETF is also contributing with validation from our partner countries. So you can go to the website and really choose a country where you will have a very detailed report on validation arrangements, on quality assurance for validation, on funding. It's all there. So with this slide, I would like to say thank you.
Maria, please, can you go back to the slide with the challenges? Because
yes,
I think that's, thank you very much. I think I also asked our colleagues to comment in the chat box about their biggest challenges. Maybe we are going to give the floor to some of them to share a little bit more. Starting with Mauritius, Ashana Krishnama, you are saying for us, one of the biggest challenges is the assessment system. Do you want to open the mic and give us maybe some more elements on that?
Hello, I am Achana from Mauritius. Hi, everyone. Yes, our biggest problem is assessment. As you know, our system has no formal assessment in the process of RPL. We end up at the evaluation of the portfolio, and there the panel decides whether to award a certificate, a full qualification or partial qualification, or even no qualification. So we want to introduce some element of assessment because in the recent years, we have noted that many young people with at least 3 years experience, they want to join the RPL rather than joining formal training. So that's why we want to introduce some kind of assessment just to act as, so that there's no difference between formal training and RPL.
And Achana, do you have resistance in order to, let's say, do this reform?
Resistance in what form?
Like someone is opposing this?
Yes, we do have some people who, especially from employers, some employers they don't believe in RPL, especially in the hospitality sector. They are not ready to accept someone with an RPL certificate compared with someone who has gone through formal training and has got a certificate.
And so you think that by including let's say, practical tests or practical assessments, you will gain in terms of credibility from the employer sides.
Yes, that's what we want.
And did the employers request adding this?
Yes, they have requested the candidates to undergo some formal assessment in order to give credibility to their qualification.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing. It's a very interesting part. Maria, maybe I would like you to comment on one point, the involvement of employers. So what is, I mean, we have already discussed a little bit last week, but of course, when we are talking about challenges, and I think the point that Archana was making about Mauritius is a very, very typical one. So how can employers then go and influence? And I think it's very positive, Archana, that actually the government takes this request and decides to change, because I think it's also a sign of a good, let's say, communication flow between the parties, which is, of course, as we said, social dialogue is at the base of RPL. So Maria, maybe some comments from your side.
Yeah, I found it very interesting. Archana, thank you very much for sharing your experience, because actually among our partner countries, when we talk about assessment methods, they are very strongly usually focused on assessment. So it's usually theoretical test, practical test. It's very centralized. A lot of our partner countries have this heritage of central planning from Soviet times. And we actually are trying now to encourage them to also look at other methods and how to use it for them. And this is exactly maybe it's not coming directly from the private sector, but it's coming from this need to be credible, and it's coming from the need to, we can put it nicely, quality assured, but actually they really want to control the process, and they want to be sure that there is no corruption, that there is no ambiguity. So they just go for very, very standardized, in some cases even up to the point that I think might be controversial, where regardless of occupation, you always have 30 questions, multiple choice test followed by practical exam. So I actually think if the employers are asking for assessment, if they feel that there is still not enough credibility, or that not enough is being extracted based on the portfolio method, then I think it's already good, because and that the state is looking at it, because once some changes are introduced, I think employers might be really then willing to accept those certificates. It's absolutely crucial. It's absolutely crucial to have employers on board. And it's not always easy. Quite a lot of our partner countries, they opened up and they invited employers and sector associations to run assessment centers. This is really a model that is quite often a good business model. But I must say, in some cases, and actually when we talk about countries that scaled up systems the most among our partner countries, this has been done not fully voluntarily. So quite often it's done by an obligation that employers in selected sectors have to certify their staff due to health and safety requirements, due to simply a plan of the state to have a skilled workforce in strategic sectors. And then employers have to do it, but I think the good thing is when employers are also invited then to run this system, to design it, to design the occupational standards, and our flagship case example is Turkey here. They have certified over 1 million of people, but they have also struggled in creating enough demand for services of the VOCTEC centers, of the assessment centers, until this obligation was introduced that in, 100 or couple of dozen of occupations, hazardous occupations, certification is mandatory. But the employers are really running the centers. So I think there are different models. I would also draw the attention to the fact that the role of employers in encouraging people and motivating personnel to use the services cannot be overestimated.
Thank you very much, Maria. A very good reflection. I think the role of employers, but also on one side, the credibility of the system, which is of course important. Otherwise, there is actually no sense in setting up an RPL system. Achana, your testimony was really great, very interesting on how to see. And also, I think it's important that in this case, Mauritius is evolving. So it was known for having set up this system, but then probably there was a little bit of numbers going down. And so this new pact with employers is actually very important in order to keep the system credible. And I think Maria was making a very nice comment on the pros and cons that come with this relationship between the employers and the government in order to keep ensuring credibility in the system. There are already two colleagues from Kenya and from Liberia who have pointed out on this point of education providers that do not accommodate flexible pathways. Maybe Nyamai Wambua from Kenya, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this? Because I think this nexus between training and RPL is of course very important. We have to be clear, RPL is not a training system, is of course an assessment system, is a route to qualification, as Maria was calling it in a nice way. But on the other side, top-up training, especially in case of partial qualification, or in case in which the person cannot receive the full qualification because there is still some top-up to be done. So the two systems need to be very coherent with each other. But as in the case that Maria was saying, you cannot wait for 10 months to access a new training course after you have been undergoing RPL. So how can we get a flexibility there? But maybe Nyamai Wumbua, you want to maybe give us more details about what is happening in Kenya and what are the challenges that you are experiencing there? I don't know if Nyamai is still with us. We also have our colleagues from Liberia, Milius. You are starting about, asking on the work that you are doing in Liberia. You are initiating the RPL system, but you see already this problem arising. Milius.
Hello.
Hello, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Maria. It was outstanding and a lot was gained from it. Like I said, the major challenge as enumerated here in your challenges for us is that education providers do not accommodate flexible pathways. In my own country, whenever there is a new idea that is so important to be implemented, people see it possibly to undermine their own jobs or functions. So if they feel that a system of RPL will be challenging certain authority or their own function, it becomes challenging. And this is what we are really faced with. So most often, we have to overly express ourselves to ensure that the significance of these systems can be projected beyond our individual offices. Like presently, I serve as the Assistant Minister for Technical Vocational Education and Training at the Ministry of Youth and Sport. And my role is to see how best we can have a lot of systems put in place that beyond our own service, others can come and tread on that pathway. But unfortunately, my country has a fragmented TVET system. You have a lot of institutions that are implementing what I will refer to as TVET deliverables. The Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Gender, the Ministry of Agriculture, then you have faith-based institutions. And based on this level of fragmentation and implementers in the system, it is very hard for us to have a harmonized approach. So like I started by saying, whenever the vision to implement a harmonized approach comes about, somebody feels that their own job or authority will be threatened. And as long as that feeling exists, we are far beyond. Let's take for example, the legislation of Latecom, the Liberian TVET Commission. With our visitation in
Are we losing Milias?
Milias, yeah, I think we have lost him.
Yeah.
Milias, maybe you can put off the video so that's. Well, I think there is a challenge, but I think yeah, but I think we got the main point. So yeah,
we got the main. Oh, there we go.
Milias, please unmute yourself.
I think we can hear you back when you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You getting me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so like
so and so. No.
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, maybe Milias, maybe we will stop here. No, it's not working.
No, unfortunately.
Okay, unfortunately it's not.
But I think
the main message was there. I think
seeing how best we can have a regulatory authority.
Okay, in any case, let us comment maybe on what we got from Milias. On one side, change management. So introducing something, risks of altering already existing kind of coherence between the different parts, and in particular, bringing RPL in a system a TVET system that is already fragmented. So this is a challenge that I think most of the countries, or in any case, many of the countries are facing. And so how can then, I mean, the training system has to adapt if we want to have a very, I mean, a well-functioning recognition of prior learning system. Maria, maybe on these 2 points, change management on one side, and then the linking training and RPL system.
I think it's very important what Milias raised, and it's very persistent in, I think, many countries. I worked for 5 years in Asia. I was in Laos, and I'm not sure if that's also the case in Africa, but in Asia, there is always this sort of a competition between Ministry of Labor and their courses and the vet schools that are under Ministry of Education, also a lot of providers. And unfortunately here, there is really a need to decide jointly on joint standards, because it's not bad when we have many providers, and it's not bad that we have short courses and longer courses. And I think this could be an opportunity, because we will need short courses, we will need a different type of courses, bridging courses. This is the fundamental need. So many people and validation candidates will fail. This is a fact that not everybody will get certified, many people. And honestly, in many countries, most of the candidates actually do not end up with certificates. For them, there should be a really good offer of bridging courses. We need to leave these people knowing what are their strengths and feeling encouraged to learn more, not feeling discouraged. So I think generally it's not bad that there are providers, but they do have to agree on some sort of order within the qualification system. And this is often the attempt of NQFs, of qualification frameworks, but it's a very long and political system to agree who decides on what, to streamline the standards. In my home country, I come from Poland, there was also an issue. There were courses of Ministry of Labor, there were courses offered, 3-4-year courses in the Ministry of Education. It took them 2 years, 200 experts, 2 years to work on, let's say, joint landscape of occupational maps and standards. And now shorter courses, longer courses, they all can be stacked up to form the same qualifications through different providers. The schools are still not, and also in Europe, the formal vet schools under Ministry of Education, for them to introduce flexible entry and exit pathways, it's like bringing an earthquake, really. When we think about implications, it has to put, the whole organization of the school has to be put upside down. Yes, this is completely beyond what they have ever experienced. So I am not surprised that it's taking long time and only few really succeed. Anglo-Saxon countries seem to be a little bit more flexible. We have a good example now of Finland, which has a really fully flexible vet system. There is a nice movie also in English. I can maybe load it later in a discussion thread, which shows that if you are old, if you are young, you can enter. We will validate your skill at the entry, and you will not have to repeat what you already know. You are guided throughout the whole process. This came with a change in vet law, and it also came with change in funding to incentivize providers, because providers don't have much business in making training shorter. They usually have business because the fees often rely on the length. So in Finland, they gave some funding in incentives to the vet providers in funding for the number of certificates awarded, so that the providers are motivated to certify people faster. Yes, not to put people through the whole cycle. But I would say this is normal, and it's maybe not very encouraging. It does take time, and with this cooperation versus competition between different providers, I think the only answer is when someone very high at the top of the government really motivates these bodies to sit together and invest time and resources in bringing order to the qualification system, to decide on all those bits and pieces, stackable part of qualifications that can be then combined into full qualifications. It's a difficult process.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think the one takeaway that I bring from this very first part of the discussion is that we have to find in the middle a system that benefits all the different stakeholders. So there is a lot to be discussed, because employers should feel that the system is credible. Training institutions should find their also economic, maybe business model into recognition. We have this more market approach versus more centralized approach that also depends on the stakes. So as in every system building, also for RPL, we need to find a sweet spot that gives the possibility actually to the system to benefit all the different stakeholders. And the last point that I want to underline from what Maria has said as also a personal takeaway, the user experience. We have already discussed with Patrick on Friday. The system should be lean for the user. So we need to not make something too complicated for the user, should be easy. We have a lot of, as Maria was saying, design thinking, and process for everything. For RPL also, we need one. So the user experience should be as seamless as possible for the user. I think this also, this sweet spot that we have to find among the interests of all the stakeholders should also take into account the best interest of the user, because at the end of the day, that's for him or her that we are creating this this system. We will go back to you, maybe Maria, at the end of our webinar. Now let's take one country example. I mean, we asked Flores to discuss a little bit with us about the case of South Africa for several reasons. I think this is known in Africa as the most developed, probably, RPL system. I know for several conversations that I had with Flores that this system still has a lot of challenges and still has a lot to do in order to continue proving its credibility and also its use for the South African population. There is also, I think, an historical element for this RPL system to be created. I think this is also a very interesting story, because as Maria was saying, systems are put in place for a reason. I mean, to cater for the needs of the population. And I think this was also in particular the case of South Africa. Maybe Flores, you can also during the presentation give a little bit some of the let's say, some information on the funding. I see that there are many questions, in particular from our delegations from Cambodia, about funding being one of the challenges. So maybe you can give, you can shed some light on how the funding works in RPL in South Africa, which is a very, very big system in a sense. Maybe Florence, if you want, I know you have also prepared some few slides to share with our colleagues. And without further ado, I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Stefano. And once again, hello, everybody. Stefano, I'd like to share my slides, but I can't share at the moment because the other presentation is still showing.
Maria, can you unshare, please?
Thank you. Okay, so let me go here. Stefano, can you guys see the? Okay,
great.
Thank you.
You can move on.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So, colleagues, as Stefano has indicated, in South Africa, we have a very large RPL system that is designed to cater for almost all qualifications, particularly occupational qualifications or workplace qualifications. Now, historically here in South Africa, the need for RPL, and we call it specifically RPL in South Africa. We don't use any other terminology. I know that if I reflect back on what Dr. Agarwal from the ILOA wrote in 2015, I think there are 14 different acronyms that you can use for RPL. But here in South Africa, we only use RPL, recognition of prior learning. And it started really in the mid-80s when there was a huge need for artisans, and we still have that need for artisans. So these are technical people, you know, the boiler makers, electricians, fitters, and so on. And we really struggled to find qualified people. But there are many people in South Africa who have learned these technical skills, not in a formal manner, particularly in the earlier years in South Africa in the mining industry. Those of you who have any knowledge of South Africa will know that South Africa primarily used to be a mining economy. And so many people who worked on the mines developed these technical skills, but they developed them through informal and non-formal learning from their peers. And so in the mining industry, even today, you have many people we call technical assistants who have got fantastic skills, but they are not recognized formally. And so in 1981 was the first time in the law a recognition of prior learning process started, and it was specifically called Section 28 of the Manpower Training Act in 1981, which these days, that piece of law is completely gone. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore. It's been removed by our democratic practices in South Africa. Many of those laws before 1994 had a lot of, they call it apartheid conditions and terminology in there, which segregated people. And fortunately, since the mid-90s, we got rid of all of that. And we today have a completely fair, equitable system for RPL. But it did start up in the 1980s for artisans, and it was called Section 28 of the Manpower Training Act. That was removed and replaced in 1995 by a piece of law called the South African Qualifications Act, which today no longer exists either. It has been replaced in 2008 by the National Qualifications Framework Act. And I'd like to just reflect on the objectives of the NQF Act, which I've shown on the slide there, because they really do stress the incredible need for inclusivity in the South African context for RPL and learning. Because this, of course, is our history. Our history was one of exclusivity, and we've completely converted that and turned it around. And today we are a very inclusive country. And the objectives of the National Qualifications Framework, and I will show you that framework right at the end of my presentation, where we are with it, was to create a single integrated national framework, access to mobility and progression. And colleagues, this mobility and progression is so important. You know, people get stuck sometimes in a certain field of career, and then that career disappears. I think, for example, for many, many years, we used to train a lot of blacksmiths in our country. Blacksmiths as a profession, as an occupation, has just about completely disappeared now from South Africa, and a lot of machines do the work that blacksmiths used to do. Enhance the quality of education and training, and of course accelerate the redress of past unfair discrimination in education, training, and employment opportunities. And it's that last objective, objective D, where RPL has really assisted us a huge amount, because there are so many people in South Africa that have got skills, and RPL allows them to be recognized for those skills. So inclusivity is without a doubt, Stefano, the biggest #1 reason why we do RPL in South Africa. And just so that the colleagues know that all qualifications that are registered on the National Qualifications Framework must have an RPL option. As soon as you submit a qualification to the South African Qualifications Authority for registration, they have a checklist, and on that checklist they say, okay, where's the RPL option? You know, do you offer RPL? And if you don't, then they say, well, try again. So it's absolutely ingrained into our systems now. The second slide, I thought I'd just reflect a little bit on the different uses of RPL in South Africa. Can I just mention, colleagues, that our certification on the basis of RPL, in other words, you go through RPL process and you get a qualification, is very uncommon in South Africa. It has happened from time to time, particularly there was in the agricultural sector a few years ago, quite a nice project that allowed people who do what they call mixed farming skills in the agricultural sector, they could get entry-level qualifications through RPL, but it's not a very common practice. The most common practice for RPL in South Africa is to give access to a final assessment, whether that's a trade test or a theoretical test, but it's about getting access to that final exam or assessment. That is what RPL is primarily used for. So you get credit, you can get credit towards qualification or part qualification, but not often certification. In fact, the latest policies that I have seen seems to stress this more and more. And I'll touch a little bit more on some of the reasons for that, but it has a lot to do with what I think Maria also referred to, is that sometimes industry themselves are not entirely convinced that the competence of a person that comes through an RPL process and has got a certificate through an RPL process, they don't really believe in the competence. There's a lot of doubt around that. And so if a person has come through the RPL process and has a final assessment, as Milias I think it was China in Mauritius indicated, that seems to be the weakness in their system. It's if you have a final assessment, then industry is a little bit more conducive to accepting a person through RPL. Just a thought that we have picked up in South Africa, and it is because we don't have a booming economy. If you have an economy that is really growing and booming and going places, then RPL works well. If you have an economy that really struggles, you are going to struggle with RPL. That's also just a thought from our side. These are the typical South African RPL candidates. Aspirant university student who wants to enroll for a degree. Just a comment, ladies and gentlemen, in South Africa at the moment in higher education, you can only get 50%, half of a degree qualification through RPL. The other 50%, you have to actually go to school, pay the fees, and do the programs. So that's the current rule. A lot of debate around that, but that's the current rule. Of course, in the artisan space, where I've worked for many years, we have a very sophisticated system. And there we have now moved towards what we call RPL toolkits, where people build a portfolio based on a very detailed checklist. We used to have a artisan RPL system based on historical letters of service, but unfortunately a lot of fraud and corruption crept into that system, and so we've had to adjust that as well. Of course, there's the unemployed person who normally formal compilation, and then migrants. You know, we never had a need for RPL for migrant workers in South Africa, but this has definitely increased over the last few years, as many very highly qualified technical people come from the South African Development Corporation areas, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Congo, even as far as East Africa. They come down to South Africa to work, and then these people have got excellent, particularly around the artisan space, many good technical qualifications, and then they come down to South Africa and we RPL them here locally. There's a particular change that often happens in many of our formal business sectors, where the law changes from time to time, and qualifications have new legal requirements. A while ago in the banking sector, for example, the law changed about they had to prove a residence, or you had to prove that you were actually a person that lived in South Africa before you could get some sort of qualification. It was just an adjustment, legal technical adjustment, and so many people had to go through that in the banking sector just to upgrade their qualifications, and they did that through RPL. Just as an example. Okay, so Stefano, you particularly wanted me to talk about challenges. Well, here they are. These are our challenges. First of all, the awareness of RPL and its potential. It really is a strange phenomenon, this, but we still find many people in South Africa just don't know about RPL and its potential that it can have for them. Of course, there's the lack of the trust in the qualification earned through RPL, I mentioned, particularly from industry. And then where you do have some knowledge of RPL by a candidate, they have limited understanding. And we just, I don't think, have done enough advocacy and training and development around RPL. Of course, it differs from sector to sector. Your technical, manufacturing, engineering sectors are better than, for example, possibly your wholesale and retail sectors and so on. We have a lot of inadequate RPL capacity and capability. So these are the people that do RPL. So your, particularly your RPL practitioners, facilitators, assessors. We need a lot of capacity building there. Funding we have, but it's very ununiform. In some areas, it's good, other areas, very poor, and we have a very sector-based funding system. It's a problem not just for RPL, it's a problem all over the system. It really is a difficulty. And we have another difficulty with funding, which is we call the unjoined funding. We have two very big funding streams in South Africa. One is a levy system, a skills levy system, and a lot of funding from the levy system is put into RPL. But we also have what we call fiscal funding, which is national treasury or budgeted funding, taxpayers' money. And sometimes we struggle to join those two systems together to get a complete funding model around a person. They're very fragmented. And then the last one, which has started to emerge over the last few years, is more strict requirements for RPL candidates. And this has a lot to do with the fraudulent activities that started to emerge, particularly in the artisan sector. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, there is a really fine publication that was issued on the 1st of March, in March 2020, very new publication. I have just shown it on the slide there, and I'm giving you the link there on the slide. It is an extensive document that was issued by the South African Qualifications Authority about RPL in South Africa. And there are numerous case studies in this document. So if anybody would like to really look at what is happening in so many different sectors in South Africa, please study that. And there are many references, best practices, all sorts of things in that document. It was done very nicely. And you'll notice the title, it talks about, it's called inclusivity. What are these solutions? Well, we find in South Africa, these are the things that we are focusing on at the moment. First of all, a common and simple language. Fortunately, we only call it RPL, but we got a little bit carried away with some of our policies in South Africa. Fortunately, that was kind of fixed and sorted out a while ago. In March 29, the South African Qualifications Authority, which is the main body that coordinates skills development and education training in South Africa, did issue a national policy and criteria. And I've also given you the direct reference to that document. And that document is a nice one because it looks at all the different policies and puts it together in one place and refers to what we call an overarching policy. So it's quite nice to have it in one documentation. That second item on that list is really, I think, the most important item of all of these things: skilled RPL practitioners. If you've got people who can really guide and support and help an RPL candidate, then it will work. This is what it's all about. And of course, a lot of it is relationship building. Our funding, it does, as I said, depend on the sector where you are. We have some sectors that fund in the region of about 30,000 Rand per candidate. I don't know if I convert that. Maybe, Stefano, you can convert 30,000 Rand to euros or dollars for the colleagues just now. That's kind of like a figure where it seems to sit, and it includes top-up training, which is probably 75% of that funding. Our top-up training for RPL almost always is the theory. People will come with very good skills, but they don't understand occupational health and safety law, for example, or they just don't understand some simple mathematical calculations and so on. And so that's where the top-up training goes. Strong quality assurance around RPL is starting to grow. I'll show you in the next slide. There's an organization in South Africa now called Quality Council for Trades and Occupations. It has centralized a lot of our quality assurance processes. We got a bit carried away in South Africa between 2000 and 2010, over the 10 to 12 year period, where we went for a very highly decentralized quality assurance system, and basically we landed up in a bit of a mess. So we've centralized it, and we are fixing a lot of the little holes. Of course, it must be competency-based. We are great believers in competency-based kind of national qualification frameworks in South Africa and RPL. Active participation by everybody, employers, organized labor, and so advocacy. And then what is starting to grow, of course, is digitally based administration systems and processes, particularly around the artisan space. We have 5 artisan occupations now, motor mechanics, boiler makers, welders, carpenters, and bricklayers, I think, where you can start doing a lot of your administrative work around RPL online through a national assessment system. That's being piloted at the moment as we speak by national government in Pretoria, but hopefully within the next 6 to 9 months, it will start be rolling out to all accredited assessment centers. My final slide, ladies and gentlemen, is a little bit scary. This is the National Qualifications Framework in South Africa. It takes you literally from grade, when you start school, levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 is schooling. You will see there is a blue organization called Umalusi, which is the General and Further Education and Training Qualification Sub-Framework. That is schooling. Umalusi is a Zulu word for shepherd, and it means we shepherd our young people in the school. So they look after that. And then after you've got to level 4, which is your National Occupational Certificate, or grade 12, or matric, the end of schooling, you go into tertiary education, which is the Council for Higher Education and Training, or CHE. And you'll see those are all your normal university type qualifications in the middle arc. But on the outside is where the excitement is. This is where the action is. This is where I work. This is where Stefano works. We work very well together, by the way, with the QCTO, Quality Council for Trades and Occupations. And this is all occupation or work-based learning. area. And we have qualifications from level 1 all the way through to level 8. And this is all modular. And this is where a lot of the RPL is based now in South Africa. So that's our broad framework. This was updated as recent as the 24th of December 2020. These are all the new kind of nomenclatures for the different qualifications. And all of these qualifications here, particularly in the QCTO environment, all of them have some form of RPL component in them. You can't get the full qualification through RPL, but you can get eventually access to the final assessment for that qualification. So Stefano, that's my story. I hope I've helped a little bit in showing the colleagues what we are doing in South Africa. I can just say, colleagues, that if somebody asks you what is the biggest weakness of our system in South Africa, it's without a doubt we are too complex. So when you build your RPL systems and your skill systems and so on, try and keep it simple. You know, we are trying to simplify our system at the moment, and I can tell you it's not easy. We are so complex. We just love complexity in South Africa, and so at the moment we're just trying to get it a lot more simpler so people can actually understand it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florus. I have a couple of questions, and then maybe we leave the floor also to our colleagues that may have questions around this 40 years adventure that is the RPL in South Africa, starting in 1981, but then, of course, with the important twist of 1995. But my two questions are the following. So first of all, the South Africa skill system is known to be very sectoral. So you have these sector bodies, the CETAs. So how is RPL then developed by the CETA? I mean, is there a relationship between sectoral approaches to skills development and or sectoral approaches to RPL? This echoes also the point that Maria was saying as a reflection, as a food for thought, identifying which are the sectors which actually need RPL. How has this sectoral approach shaped the RPL ecosystem in South Africa? This is my first question. And the second is revolving around digitalization. You said, and I know that some of our participants are really interested into everything that will help digitalizing their RPL system. I think also this was the case with the e-portfolios in the Philippines. And but I think this is also interesting for all to understand. What are the dimensions or the directions of this digitalization that you have just introduced? So these are my two questions. Maybe you can start with those, and then I encourage all the colleagues to write and post their questions to Florus in order to let's deep dive a little bit into the South African experience. Florus.
Thanks, Stefano. Yes, you're perfectly correct. The South African skill development system is very sector-based to date, and each sector, we call them sector education training authorities, SETAs for the acronym. There are 21 of them, so the South African economy is broken up. So every single sector of the economy has a SETA. And within those SETAs, they all work within an RPL process. At one stage, Stefano, what did happen was that the RPL policies and requirements went in different directions. This is what I referred to earlier on, the quality assurance of learning and development, including skills and RPL, was becoming extremely fragmented. And so you had very peculiar policies that were almost in conflict with each other. That was cleaned up, and we now do have a centralized policy which requires all the SETAs to comply to a single basic policy process. And fundamental within that policy is that RPL is always for access to a final assessment. And so all the SETAs now comply with that. Where the SETAs have become very good at the RPL thing is, first of all, of course, where they offer capacity development for the RPL experts within their sector. So there's a lot of training, funding for training of RPL assessors, for RPL advisors, for moderators, and so they do a lot of that within each of their sectors. Different sectors have different levels. I know, for example, in the manufacturing engineering related sector, it's something that they do a lot of. And the mining sector as well, I worked there for about 4 years, and they also developed a lot of capacity. So the sectors at the moment, the way we're going in South Africa and starting to work now, is the SETAs have got two fundamental functions in South Africa now in the skills development system. One is skills planning. So what are the occupations we need and what is the best way to get them? So that's it. And we have a very defined scarce skills list and so on. So they're very important. So research and so on. And then the other very critical role they play is called resourcing the system. And that is, of course, where the funding of training of RPL advisors capacity. So they have to resource the system and so on. So that's the sector-based system. But RPL generally has started to standardize from a policy process across all 21 sectors. On the digitalization and the
So sorry, to conclude this sectoral thing,
Yeah.
one common policy for all the sectors, but then the SETAs do play a role in the RPL.
They play the role, the implementation role.
Okay.
Very important, yeah. So they would say, for example, they would see the policy, and the policy would say that, you know, you need to make sure that you have assessment centers in the particular areas where there's a need. So maybe in Durban, down in the coastal area, you need more RPL for motor mechanics because there's a very large Toyota factory there and a lot of people that work in motor cars. So that particular sector and SETA would say, okay, guys, do we make sure that we've got at least 2 or 3 assessment centers that have got all the necessary RPL advisors and capacity guys in that area? The SETA would go in and they would build the capacity resources to be able to do that. So that's where the role of the SETAs come in. But when they
And they use their money. So actually, part of the skills money goes. I wanted to also to touch upon the funding question that some of our Cambodian delegates have asked in the chat box. So here, in the sectoral skills system, you also have money that is injected to RPL from the sector budget, so to say.
Oh, yes, yeah. So just briefly, Stefano, so the colleagues will know, all employers in every sector of South Africa, with the exception of a very small employer, so people whose annual salary bill is less than 500,000 Rand a year, which is very small, okay? Everybody else pays a levy, 1% of remuneration. And that levy eventually gets to the SETA. And 80% of it, 20% goes off to a national skills fund, which is used to assist unemployed people to develop basic skills and so on, community. However, of that 80% that goes into the SETA, then very often large RPL projects are established within each sector using that funding. And particularly in the automotive sector, they have done this quite extensively to say, guys, we need an RPL project in automotive engineering. And the SETA will set it up and they will resource it and develop it and so on. Pretoria, Durban, and Port Elizabeth are the 3 big automotive development areas. And of course, East London, where Mercedes-Benz is. We don't have any Ferrari manufacturing companies in South Africa, but we are hopeful.
We keep it in Italy, you know, Ferrari, we want to keep it, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, thank you very much. I think this is very important. So one of the possible funding scheme, and the South Africa case is one, is sectoral. So actually, it is even more, probably more related to the need of the industry, because the industry itself drives the SETAs in a sense.
Totally, yeah, no, totally. Look, remember the governance body, or the authority that sits at the SETA is a social partner-based structure. So you have business and organized labor and national government are the authority of each seater, and it's very clearly defined, number of seats and so on. And they are the people that approve the project. You know, in the mining industry, for example, Stefano, you know, one of the biggest problems we had for many years in the mining industry was basic literacy and numeracy. And so what we did for quite a few years was fund RPL around mathematics, English, science, core skills. And that worked very well, because that helped many people then actually be able to move a little bit up in the career path, because they didn't have these basic literacy skills. And so RPL sometimes is not only technical, you know, sometimes you have to do RPL for these basic core skills, you know. So we had to do that. But each sector is different, of course. Very important.
We will come back to this point, because many times in Africa we have heard this challenge being one of the biggest challenges. How can we give qualifications or RPL people who cannot write and speak? Because in the informal sector in many African countries, people do not have those skills. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how RPL has helped in this literacy and core skills issues.
Okay, I can go on to that, but on the digitalization, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Please.
So I just want to mention on the digitalization in South Africa, this has also been very sector-based, and it depends on the sector how quickly this is implemented. So I think if that previous book that I referred to, this one that I'm showing there, the South African Qualification Authority, the colleagues, in there is a case study there of the banking sector and how the banking sector used 100% online RPL system to allow many of their people, particularly in the deep rural areas, because those people couldn't get to assessment centers, they used online systems in some of the rural areas to be able to get their certification. So it depends very much on the sector. The banking sector did a complete sophisticated online RPL system. And in the engineering sector, it's been a little bit more difficult because with the engineering sector, you've got to kind of observe and really see hand skills and so on. Not that easy to do online. You've got to observe, do a lot of observation. So what they have decided at the moment in the engineering sector is that we will do as much administrative work using digital processes. And so that's where the RPL system around engineering is going. 100% admin will be digital, and then you will still be able to do the actual observation and so on. We haven't quite got to the use of cameras and that technology yet. As far as I know, Stefano, I know that there's some of the European countries are starting to use video camera technology and so on for observing assessments. I haven't heard of that being practiced yet in South Africa. It might still come. Some of the individuals in some of our sectors are very innovative, and it might still happen. And particularly in solar energy. Solar is something that is really growing. And I know that there are, for example, in Cape Town, with the city of Cape Town, the very large municipality, the metro down there, they've had people working on solar panel projects for probably close to 10 years, installing solar panels. They have a target of 30% of the house roofs in Cape Town must have solar panels on by 2030, something like that too, because we have a big energy problem in South Africa. And I know that many of those people have learned skills, but there is no formal certification of those skills. And there we may start using, I think, if I know my friends at a place called the University of the Western Cape, or the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, those two universities are very clever with their digital technology. They might start using camera technology to watch people putting panels on roofs, you know. And
so digitalization as a means to make the process leaner for the user.
Leaner for the user, and also to be able to assess more people.
Okay.
I think that is quite important, you know, because if you video camera, say 10 guys working on solar panels on roofs, and you focus on different ones of them, and you send that to an assessor, that person could be assessing 10 people in one sitting. interesting. Interesting.
Also,
I don't know if my friend Maria from Philippines, who I've had 1 or 2 discussions with a little bit about, she may want to comment on that. We've had some really interesting. I love the Philippine model, by the way. I think it's really starting to give us some really good lessons that we can learn from. Okay. Sorry, you wanted to also talk about the ABET, or the adult education and training, or those basic literacy skills and so on. Yes, this is something we really do need to grow. We've had a lot of hard work over the years with that. And so what happened about, it's probably about 8, 9, 10 years ago, and it started in the mining industry, but now it's now a common practice, and it's available for all industries. We developed a process called a foundational learning competence, FLC, which is a test for maths literacy and communications literacy. And it's about a 2-hour test, and it's done online and at very, very low cost, 250 Rand, which is very little, a few dollars. And there is a central organization called the IEB, the Independent Examinations Board, that looks after this for the entire country. But they have many, many assessment centers, particularly at the public TVET colleges. So you can go to a public TVET college, and if you just feel that your math literacy or your communication literacy, you've developed these skills over the years, because as an adult, you go to the bank, you sit, you learn ATM, you watch TV, you speak to your children. You've never been to a formal schooling environment, but you learn, you see. And now you just want to have something that says, what is your literacy level? And you can go and actually sign up, do this test, and it not only gives you a nice report on what is your foundational literacy competency, but it also indicates areas that you want to do a little bit of additional study on. So we have the FLC, which is now operating in South Africa, that has helped us a lot with getting our people into a foundational literacy competence level to be able to access entry-level qualifications.
So this has been coupled with technical RPL.
Yes. So we don't call it RPL, but basically it's an RPL mechanism, because you don't have to study for it. It's on the basis of your historic knowledge and competence. You sign up, you do the test, you come back, and it gives you a report that gives you your gaps, and off you go. So in effect, it's an RPL system. We just call it the Foundational Learning Competency Assessment, but for all intents and purposes, it's an RPL system. And
people can, of course, go and can they find literacy opportunities to then be able to pass this test? So there are 2 ways of filling your gaps. So if you we always say to people, do the test first, check your own levels of knowledge and understanding, identify those gaps. And once you have your report with the gaps, then you can either go to a public community education and training college. We have a lot of them in the country. We have a lot of CLCs, and they run normally after hours and evenings and weekends, because many of these people are people that work. And so they do there, and then they can go there for either English or maths or science or other language type courses, or of course the private sector as well. There are a lot of private sector organizations, and often these are NGOs. So these are non-profit operations. A lot of the churches, religious organizations offer large numbers of these kind of things. And so you go there, you do that, and of course when you finish your course, you go back and you redo the test, and eventually you pass, and you have your foundational learning competencies. It's registered on the NQF as a part qualification, but the most important thing about the FLC is it gives you access, particularly to apprenticeships and learnerships. Those are the 2 learning pathways that it gives you access to, which is very important. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. I think we are there. It's 12:30 here in Turin. We have been doing a lot of questioning around the challenges, but also how to try to overcome these challenges. Maybe, Maria, another point from you before closing on funding. So what are I mean, I have seen specifically our colleagues from Cambodia putting funding as a big, of course, a big issue that they have for the system. What are the models, funding models? Of course, we will have an entire module that will be dedicated to those topics. But in terms of challenges, how do you see this happening, and how do you see countries overcoming funding-related challenges?
Yes, we do see a challenge. Yes, so basically the public funding is necessary, and I think South African example is very interesting. And we do not have in continental Europe that much examples, or in our partner countries, of funding based on levy. But I think this is definitely a direction that is worth exploring. There is a lot of funding typically used to start the system through the donor-funded projects. A lot of funding at the European level comes from EU budget. Of course, we have, and there is usually some sort of cost sharing between public funding and fees that are paid by candidates. In my home countries, the fees charged for validation in the non-formal qualifications, which are quite often the kind of very interesting, very labor market relevant qualifications, new qualifications on the register, they are very high. They are very high, and that is very clear that it does not bring that many people to the system. People use it when there is subsidized funding through employment projects. In our partner countries, one model was the example of Turkey, where the employers have to cover costs of certification because certification is mandatory. But then again, when the system tries to go beyond mandatory certification to other qualifications, that goes slower. So I think it's very clear that participants candidates will need support. To some extent, it's also encouraged to have a market of providers, because that triggers some quality of services. It can maybe in time push prices down, but at the moment it's a very mixed picture. In some of the European countries, there is a very good model of cooperation on the sectoral level, that within the sectors, trade unions and employers decide together on committing some level of funding to the training.
Okay. Thanks, Maria, for these elements. I see that also the idea that you floated some time ago about assessment centers that are maybe separate from educational providers, maybe one that could be interesting. I see Deborah from Barbados getting interest on this topic. I think, I mean, you will also hear directly from our Turkish friends throughout the course, because we registered an interview to the people that are in charge of this. So you will see also how this works. Okay, so thank you very much, Maria and Flores. It was a pleasure to have this conversation today around the challenges. It was great to hear from the different country experiences, also the focus of South Africa with the new trends, but also with some specific features of it. So thank you very much also to all of our participants for your time, for your interest in the topic. As you will see in the platform, a lot of learning activities for this week. So we will reconnect on that special moment on Thursday. So we are going to have also a bit of fun together, not to make always things too serious, but we will try to see how new technology can also support our experience sharing. So thank you very much for having been with us today. It was a pleasure as usual. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Vera. Thanks, Maria and Flores for your commitment and your very interesting presentation. Thank you very much, and we keep in touch.
Thanks, Stefano. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.